The year 795 marked the start of something that would change Ireland forever. On a cold morning, strange ships with dragon-shaped heads appeared on the horizon near Rathlin Island, off Ireland's northeast coast. These ships carried Norse raiders, better known as Vikings, and their arrival began nearly 200 years of attacks, settlements, and major changes for the Irish people. The Vikings who first came to Ireland sailed from Norway in their famous longships. These boats were special. They could move fast through the ocean but also slide up onto beaches. This meant the Vikings could attack quickly and leave before anyone could stop them. Their ships typically held 30 to 60 men, all armed with axes, swords, and shields. That first raid in 795 targeted Rathlin Island's monastery. The monastery wasn't just a place for prayers. It kept valuable things like golden crosses, jeweled books, and silver cups used in church services. The Vikings knew these religious places were often unprotected and full of treasures they could easily take. The monks at Rathlin had no warning. The raiders appeared suddenly, taking everything valuable they could find. They burned buildings, stole sacred objects, and took some monks as slaves. This attack shocked everyone in Ireland because nothing like it had ever happened before. Religious places were supposed to be safe and respected. News of the raid spread across Ireland through travellers and merchants. Other monasteries heard about what happened and became scared they would be next. They were right to worry. Over the next few years, more Viking ships came to Ireland's coasts. The raiders learned they could sail up Ireland's rivers to reach monasteries and settlements further inland. The Irish people of 795 lived in a world very different from ours. Their society was split into many small kingdoms, each with its own ruler. These kingdoms often fought each other, which meant they weren't ready to work together against the Vikings. The Irish warriors were brave, but they mainly fought on land and weren't used to enemies coming from the sea. Monasteries tried to protect themselves after hearing about the first raids. Some built round towers, tall, narrow buildings with doors high above the ground. Monks could climb up inside with their valuable things when Vikings attacked. Some monasteries moved their precious books and treasures to safer places inland. Others started keeping lookouts to watch for Viking ships. The Vikings had good reasons for choosing Ireland as a target. First, Ireland was close enough to Norway that they could sail there in summer and return home before winter storms made the sea too dangerous. Second, Irish monasteries were wealthy and poorly defended. Third, Ireland had many natural harbours where Vikings could safely leave their ships while they raided inland. The Vikings who came in 795 were not interested in staying in Ireland. They wanted to take valuable things home to Norway. They timed their raids for summer. When the weather made sailing safer, they would appear suddenly, attack quickly, and leave before local Irish forces could gather to fight back. The Irish people called the Vikings foreign heathens or Gentiles because they weren't Christian. The Vikings followed their own gods like Odin and Thor. This religious difference made their attacks on Christian monasteries even more shocking to the Irish. The Vikings didn't care about destroying holy objects that were precious to the Irish people. When Vikings attacked, they didn't just take gold and silver, they also took people as slaves. Young, strong monks and local people would be captured and sold in slave markets back in Norway or traded to other countries. This human trafficking added another layer of terror to Viking raids. The raid on Rathlin showed future Vikings that Ireland was a good target. Within a few years, more raids happened at other coastal monasteries. Places like Innismurray, Innisbofin, and the Isle of Man were all attacked. Each successful raid encouraged more Vikings to try their luck in Ireland. The Irish didn't just accept these attacks. They tried to fight back, but it was hard. The Vikings could appear anywhere along the coast, strike quickly, and leave before defenders arrived. The Irish kingdoms weren't used to fighting together, which made it harder to organise any big defence against the raiders. Written records from 795 tell us about the fear these first raids caused. Irish monks wrote in their books about dark ships bringing cruel men who showed no mercy. They described the Vikings as violent warriors who respected nothing sacred. These early writings show how traumatic the first Viking attacks were for the Irish people. The Vikings had special advantages that made them hard to stop. Their ships were faster and more maneuverable than any boats the Irish had. They could sail in shallow water and land on beaches. The Vikings also had better weapons. Their iron swords were often superior to Irish weapons. They wore chain-mail armor that protected them in fights. The year 795 started a new era in Irish history. The raids forced changes in how Irish people lived and defended themselves. Settlements moved away from the coast. People built stronger walls around their towns. Monasteries changed how they were built, adding defensive features they never needed before. The first raiders took home stories about Ireland's wealth, especially in its monasteries. They told others in Norway about the gold, silver, and other valuable things they found. These stories encouraged more Vikings to sail to Ireland in the following years. Each raid taught them more about Ireland's geography and weak spots. Life changed for ordinary Irish people after 795. Coastal communities lived in constant fear of raids. Farmers worried about their crops being stolen or burned. Families feared being taken as slaves. The raids disrupted trade and made everyday life more dangerous, especially near the coast. The Vikings chose their targets carefully. They looked for places that were wealthy but couldn't defend themselves well. Monasteries were perfect. They had valuable things but usually only had monks, not warriors, living there. The raiders also attacked farming communities and trading posts along the coast. Irish kings and chiefs learned they needed new ways to fight after 795. They started building watchtowers along the coast to spot Viking ships. They tried to copy Viking weapons and fighting styles. Some Irish kingdoms began building their own ships to fight the Vikings at sea, though this took many years to achieve. The raid on Rathlin showed a pattern that Vikings would follow in many later attacks. They came at dawn when people were just waking up. They surrounded their target quickly to prevent escape. They took everything valuable they could carry and burned what they couldn't take. Then they left before help could arrive. The Vikings who first raided Ireland weren't just random pirates. They were part of Norse society, where raiding was seen as an honorable way for young men to gain wealth and fame. Many were younger sons of chiefs who wouldn't inherit land at home, so they looked to raids to make their fortune. After 795, the Irish started hiding their valuables better. Monasteries built secret rooms to store their most precious books and religious objects. Some communities buried their valuable things, creating treasure hoards that archaeologists still find today. They also started keeping better lookouts and developed warning systems using smoke signals or beacon fires. The Viking raids changed how the Irish thought about the sea. Before 795, they saw the ocean as a barrier that protected them. After the raids began, they realized the sea was also a road their enemies could use to attack them. This changed how they built their settlements and organized their defenses. The first Vikings didn't know much about Ireland when they arrived in 795. They learned about the country by raiding it. Each attack taught them more about Ireland's geography, wealth, and defenses. They used this knowledge to plan bigger and more successful raids in later years. The Irish monks who survived the first raids wrote about their experiences. These writings help us understand what happened. They describe the Vikings' appearance, their long hair, heavy weapons, and fierce fighting style. These descriptions tell us how different and frightening the Vikings seemed to the Irish people. The success of the 795 raids convinced Norse leaders that Ireland was worth targeting with bigger forces. In later years, they sent larger fleets with hundreds of warriors. These bigger raids led to Vikings setting up bases in Ireland, which they used to attack inland areas that were harder to reach from Norway. Weather played a big part in when Vikings could raid Ireland. They usually attacked between spring and fall, when seas were calmer. Irish people learned to be especially watchful during these months. Winter storms gave them some safety because Vikings couldn't safely cross the North Sea then. The Vikings brought new things to Ireland besides violence. They were skilled sailors and traders who eventually established towns like Dublin. They introduced new ways of building ships and houses. They brought new styles of art and craft making. Even though the raids were terrible, this contact between cultures led to some positive changes in Ireland. Irish society in 795 wasn't ready for attackers like the Vikings. The Irish were used to fighting other Irish kingdoms, usually with specific rules about how to fight. The Vikings ignored these rules and fought differently. This meant the Irish had to change how they thought about warfare and defense. The raid on Rathlin showed that Irish monasteries needed to change. Over time, they started keeping warriors to protect them. Some monasteries moved to safer locations inland. Others built strong walls and defences. The peaceful religious communities of early Ireland had to become more like fortresses. Communication between different parts of Ireland improved because of the Viking threat. Irish kingdoms realised they needed to warn each other about raids. They created better systems for sending messages and sharing information. This helped them work together better, though it took many years to develop good cooperation. The Vikings who came in 795 were experienced sailors who knew how to use winds and tides. They timed their attacks for when conditions were best for sailing. They knew how to navigate by the sun and stars. Their sailing skills gave them a big advantage over the Irish, who weren't as good at sea travel. The first raids taught the Irish that they needed better weapons and armour. Traditional Irish weapons like spears and leather shields weren't always good enough against Viking swords and mail armour. Over time, Irish warriors started using similar weapons and armour to the Vikings, making fights more even. The Vikings brought new words into the Irish language. Words about ships and sailing came from Norse. Some Irish place names, especially along the coast, come from Viking words. This shows how the contact between these peoples, even though it started with violence, led to mixing of their cultures. The Irish learned that wealth could be dangerous after 795. Having valuable things might attract raiders. Some monasteries started keeping fewer obvious treasures. Rich families became more careful about showing their wealth. Communities learned to hide or disguise valuable things to avoid attracting Vikings. Viking raids affected Irish art and crafts. Some beautiful Irish treasures were stolen or destroyed. But Irish craftspeople learned new styles and techniques from Viking art they saw. They started mixing Irish and Norse designs, creating new styles of jewellery and decoration that combined both cultures. The attacks that started in 795 forced the Irish church to change. Some monasteries became more like fortresses than religious places. Monks had to spend time watching for raiders instead of studying and praying. The church lost many valuable books and artworks, but also became stronger and better organised to protect itself. Irish farming changed because of Viking raids. Farmers started growing crops that could be quickly harvested and hidden. They kept fewer cattle near the coast because cows were easy for raiders to steal. Some communities moved their farms inland or to higher ground where they could better see raiders coming. The Vikings who first came to Ireland noticed things about the country that made it good for raiding. It had many rivers they could sail up. It had lots of isolated communities they could attack. The Irish kingdoms often fought each other instead of joining together against raiders. All these things made Ireland an attractive target. After 795, Irish communities had to change how they built things. They made walls stronger. They built houses where they could see the sea. They created hidden storage places for food and valuables. They made paths that let people quickly escape to safer places inland. These changes helped protect against raids. The first Viking raids taught Irish leaders important lessons. They learned they needed better ways to communicate and work together. They learned they needed to protect their coasts better. They learned they needed different ways of fighting. These lessons helped them deal with later Viking attacks better. Trade in Ireland changed after the Vikings came. Some trading posts were raided and destroyed. But the Vikings were also traders themselves, and eventually they helped create new trading networks. They connected Ireland with other parts of Europe through trade, bringing new goods and ideas to the country. The raids that started in 795 affected Irish education. Monasteries were Ireland's main places of learning. When Vikings attacked them, books were burned and scholars were killed or taken as slaves. This damaged Ireland's tradition of learning, though many monasteries managed to save their most important books. The Vikings who raided Ireland weren't all the same. Some were just interested in quick raids for treasure. Others wanted to explore and find new places to settle. Later Vikings were interested in trading and building towns. The raiders of 795 were the first wave of what would become a complex relationship between Norse and Irish people. The Irish people showed great strength during the Viking Age. They didn't give up when raiders attacked. They found new ways to protect themselves. They rebuilt what was destroyed. They learned from their enemies and became stronger. The hard times that started in 795 showed how tough and adaptable the Irish people were. The effects of the first Viking raids lasted long after 795. They started changes that shaped Irish society for hundreds of years. The raids led to new ways of building, fighting, and organizing communities. They started interaction between Irish and Norse cultures that created new art styles and traditions. Looking at the raid on Rathlin and other early Viking attacks helps us understand both Irish and Viking society better. We can see what was important to both peoples, what they wanted to protect or wanted to take. We can see how they fought and how they lived. We can see how they affected each other. Archaeological evidence helps us understand what happened in 795 and the years that followed. Scientists find burned buildings, hidden treasures, and lost Viking weapons. These things tell us about the raids and how people dealt with them. They show us both the violence of the raids and how people tried to protect themselves. The ships that appeared off Rathlin in 795 brought more than just raiders. They brought the start of changes that would make Ireland different forever. Those changes weren't all bad. Some led to new opportunities and developments. But they started with violence and fear that affected everyone in Ireland. The Viking Age in Ireland, which started in 795, shows how meetings between different cultures can bring both destruction and creation. The Vikings damaged much of Ireland's old way of life, but they also helped create new things. Their influence mixed with Irish culture to make something new and different. Irish society survived the Viking Age and grew stronger from it. The attacks that started in 795 forced the Irish to adapt and change. They learned to defend themselves better. They learned new skills. They kept their own culture while taking useful things from Viking culture. They showed they could face hard times and survive. The Irish coast played a big role in how the Vikings attacked. Places with good natural harbours became targets for raids. The Vikings learned to use islands, bays and inlets, finding safe places to anchor their ships while their shacks at nearby targets. They especially liked places where rivers met the sea, as these gave them routes to travel inland. Food was another reason the Vikings raided Ireland. They took cattle, sheep, and stored grain from the places they attacked. This helped feed their crews during long voyages and gave them supplies to take home. The Irish farmers lost not just their animals and food, but also their seeds for the next year's crops, making it hard to recover from raids. The Norse raiders brought their own food traditions to Ireland. They carried dried fish and other preserved foods on their ships. When they started staying longer in Ireland, they brought new ways of preserving food and different farming methods. Some of these methods helped Irish people improve their own food production. The Vikings' clothing looked strange to Irish people. They wore woolen clothes, often with bright colours, and had different styles of shoes and cloaks than the Irish wore. Their warriors wore leather and iron armour that was different from Irish armour. These differences in appearance made them easy to spot and added to the fear they caused. Weather signs became very important to Irish coastal communities after 795. They watched for the kinds of winds and weather that would bring Viking ships. They learned that raiders usually came on clear days with good winds. Stormy weather usually meant safety, as Viking ships wouldn't risk sailing in bad conditions. The Vikings brought their own tools and craft skills. They were good at working with iron and wood. They made superior ships, weapons, and tools. Over time, Irish craftspeople learned some Viking methods and combined them with their own skills. This mixing of techniques led to better Irish metalwork and shipbuilding. Family life changed in Irish coastal areas because of the raids. Families taught their children to watch for danger and know where to hide. They made plans for what to do if raiders came. Some families split up, with some members living further inland where it was safer. These changes affected how communities lived and worked together. The Vikings who first raided Ireland had their own laws and customs. They believed that taking things by force was honourable if you were strong enough to do it. This was very different from Irish laws, which had strict rules about property and stealing. These different beliefs about right and wrong made it harder for Irish people to understand or deal with the raiders. Irish music and stories changed because of the Viking raids. People made songs about brave defenders and cruel raiders. They told stories about successful fights against Vikings and miraculous escapes. Some of these stories and songs still exist today, showing how important these events were to Irish culture. The noise of a Viking raid stayed in people's memories. Survivors described the sound of oars in the water, the war cries of raiders, the crash of weapons, and the screams of victims. These sounds became part of Irish stories about raids, adding to the fear that Vikings caused. Religion affected how both sides acted. The Vikings attacked churches because they were rich targets, not because they hated Christianity. Some Vikings later became Christians themselves. The Irish saw attacks on churches as extra evil because they were holy places. This religious difference made the raids seem worse to Irish people. Women faced special dangers during Viking raids. They could be taken as slaves or wives by raiders. Some women fought to defend their homes. Others helped organize community defenses or took care of people hurt in raids. The raids changed how women lived and what they needed to know to protect themselves and their families. Children's lives changed too. They had to learn to be careful and watchful. They needed to know how to hide or run away if raiders came. Some children were taken as slaves, never seeing their families again. Growing up in coastal Ireland became more dangerous and frightening after the Vikings came. Irish boats and ships changed because of the Vikings. The Irish learned to build stronger, faster boats by looking at Viking ships. They started using Viking ways of sailing and navigation. These improvements helped Irish sailors travel better and eventually fight back against raiders more effectively. The Vikings brought new kinds of dogs and horses to Ireland. Their horses were bigger and stronger than Irish horses. Their dogs were bred for fighting and hunting. These animals mixed with Irish breeds, creating new types that were better for warfare and farming. Both sides learned from watching each other fight. The Irish learned Viking battle tactics and weapons use. The Vikings learned about fighting in Irish forests and bogs. This mixing of fighting styles created new ways of warfare in Ireland that were different from either side's original methods. The raids affected Irish sports and games. Fighting skills became more important in young people's training. Traditional Irish sports started including more military-style skills. Communities spent more time practicing fighting and less time on peaceful games and activities. Viking raiders learned about Irish healing methods when they got hurt during raids. Irish people learned about Viking medical knowledge when treating captives or dealing with Vikings who settled in Ireland. This led to both sides learning new ways to treat injuries and illnesses. The ways Irish people buried their dead changed in some places because of the raids. Some communities started burying valuable things with bodies in secret places to keep raiders from finding them. Others changed their funeral customs to make burials faster and simpler in case raiders came during a funeral. Both sides learned new words from each other during raids and fights. Irish warriors learned Viking battle cries and commands. Vikings learned Irish words for places and things they found. This sharing of language happened even though the two sides were enemies. The Vikings' way of building ships influenced how Irish people thought about boat design. Viking ships were slim and fast, good for raids. Irish boats were rounder and slower, better for fishing and trading. Over time, Irish builders made boats that mixed both styles, creating better vessels for their needs. The success of the first raids in 795 showed other Vikings that Ireland's weather wasn't too bad for sailing. The seas around Ireland were rough but manageable in summer. This knowledge encouraged more Vikings to try raiding Ireland, as they knew they could handle the sailing conditions. Irish communities learned to keep important records in multiple places after the first raids. They copied valuable books and documents and kept them in different locations. This helped save many important writings when Vikings destroyed some monasteries. It also created a system of backing up important information that helped preserve Irish history and culture. These changes that started with the first Viking raids in 795 didn't just affect Ireland. They spread to other places too. Irish people who fled from raiders brought their stories and experiences to other countries. Vikings who raided Ireland went on to raid other places, using what they learned in Ireland to attack other targets. The name Viking itself came to mean something special in Ireland. It meant more than just Norse raiders. It meant a particular kind of danger that could come from the sea at any time. The word took on layers of meaning in Irish language and culture, showing how deeply these raids affected Irish society. The first Viking raids on Ireland in 795 started something that would last for generations. They began changes that touched every part of life in Ireland, from big things like warfare and trade to small things like everyday words and customs. The effects of those first raids can still be seen in Ireland today, in everything from place names to stories to the ways coastal towns are buoys,